If you were to take all of the US editions of the book Peril at End House and stack them on top of each other, they would reach the moon. This famous author is the most translated writer of all time. Her books have been enjoyed in over 100 languages. She's also been featured in the Guinness World Records for the thickest book, a one-volume edition of the complete Miss Marple stories. You've surely guessed it by now. I'm talking about Agatha Christie. Throughout her astonishing writing career, she published 66 detective novels and 14 short story collections under her own name, and many other stories under pseudonyms. She also gave us some of the most loved characters in all of international literature, like the arrogant Detective Hercule Poirot, Miss Jane Marple, or Tommy and Tuppence. The world's longest-running play, The Mousetrap, also bears the mark of her brilliance. She was born Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller in Torquay, Devon, England. Not a lot of people know that she might have remained illiterate if it hadn't been for her love of reading and ambition. Her mother believed she didn't need to know how to read, at least not until she turned 8. But she was so curious and enjoyed reading so much that she learned how to read by the age of 4. Agatha was educated at home under the supervision of her parents and sister and loved reading, writing, and basic mathematics. She also loved music, often engaging with the piano and the mandolin. In 1901, when she was just 10 years old, she wrote her first poem called The Cow Slip. The city of Torquay was a coastal town in England, and during the summer, Agatha enjoyed swimming in the sea almost every day. It was quite the posh seaside resort, filled with wealthy Europeans and even royalty. It was often dubbed the English Riviera. Memories of her time spent here were often described in her books, as well as in her autobiography. She would often visit the beach with her family, while her mother and grandmother liked to sunbathe and enjoy a picnic. Agatha was eager to get into the water as soon as possible. But to do so, she would first need to change into her bathing suit. Back then, this beach wasn't supposed to be equally enjoyed by men and women at the same time. That's why even the local council kept an eye on the way people bathed in the sea. So much so that men weren't allowed to bathe within 50 yards of a woman's bathing machine, a place where women could change into their swimming attire and be transported into the water. Just in case you were wondering, women back then weren't exactly comfortable while swimming either. They had to be fully dressed in pants and a frilly dress that covered them up almost completely. But let's get back to those bathing machines, shall we? Those were little cabins on wheels, featuring entrances on both sides. Once you'd spot one on the beach, you could enter it and change. The tiny hut would then be transported into deeper waters, either by a man or a horse. When reaching the desired spot, you could get out the opposite door and dive into the sea, far away from any curious eyes. After you were done lounging around in the water, you'd just climb back in the bathing machine and raise a flag, signaling you were ready to get back to the beach. Back to the writer's story in 1905. Agatha was sent to Paris and enrolled in a boarding school where, surprisingly, she focused more on music rather than writing. She soon figured out a career in music wasn't necessarily the best fit for her personality and talents, but did secretly harbor the desire to become an opera singer for the rest of her life. When she was just 18 years old, Agatha wrote her first short story called The House of Beauty. Around the same time, she started putting together her first novel too, called Snow Upon the Desert, written under the pseudonym Monosyllaba. All 6 publishers she sent the book to ended up declining it. In 1912, she met the man that would soon become her husband. His name was Archibald Archie Christie, and they tied the knot in 1914. Soon enough, in 1916, she penned her first detective novel, called The Mysterious Affair at Styles. It would be the novel that introduced Hercule Poirot to the world. He was described as a former Belgian police officer with a really imposing mustache and an egg-shaped head. Despite her lovely family and her growing writing career, on Friday, December 3, 1926, Agatha simply disappeared from her home. The newspapers at the time went wild. It was the perfect plot twist for a crime novelist's life. The truth behind her disappearance may still be hidden to this day, but let's look at some of the facts though. In April of 1926, Agatha's mother, Claire, sadly passed away. It was a difficult time for the writer as the two shared a close bond. In August of the same year, Agatha's husband came to her with a shocking request. He wanted to separate, claiming he was in love with another woman. Months later, in December, they had a fight which seems to have been the last straw. Later that same evening, the author left her only daughter in the company of the maid and disappeared from her home in Sunningdale. The next day, her car was found above a quarry, half hidden in some bushes, several miles away from her home. Inside were some clothes and her expired driver's license. The headlights were still on. Was it a car accident? At that time, Agatha wasn't as popular as she is today. But since a considerable reward was being offered to anyone who could offer any information on where she was, her story soon became a national sensation. Her estranged husband became the primary suspect. A considerable number of people started looking for her, both policemen and volunteers. Days had gone by and there was no sign of her, so extreme measures had to be taken. A local lake was dredged just in case something had gone terribly wrong and she'd fallen over. Politicians started putting pressure on the police to help find her as soon as possible. Even fellow writer Sir Arthur Conan Doyle got involved in the manhunt. But in a more creative way, to say the least. He resorted to the services of a fortune teller, hoping to discover her whereabouts by using one of Agatha's gloves. 10 days later, when the hope of finding her alive had already started to wear off, a waiter at the Hydropathic Hotel in Harrogate, Yorkshire, reached out to the police with an intriguing tip. A South African guest was staying at the hotel, and her name was Teresa Neal. Nothing unusual so far, but she did seem to resemble the author. Her husband rapidly traveled to the hotel, accompanied by the police. He kept his presence there hidden by sitting in the corner of the hotel's dining room. Soon enough, Agatha entered the room nonchalantly and began reading the same newspaper that featured her own disappearance on the front page. He decided to approach her, but she did not seem to recognize him. Nevertheless, it was clear to everyone else that Agatha Christie had been found. People have wondered for years what may have caused this unusual behavior. Some said the loss of her mother and the dissolution of her marriage put significant pressure on her health and she simply had a breakdown. Others suggest she might have pulled the best publicity stunt ever known, creating a crime story around her own life to promote those she had been writing for so many years. There was another theory that claimed Agatha might have indeed had amnesia, and that's why she failed to initially recognize her husband at the hotel that day. What's obvious is that this was an event she wanted to forget. She never mentioned anything about this story ever again, not even in her autobiography, which was published after she passed away in November of 1977.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.